Kim Woo-jin stood in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council and felt the weight of 300 years of human history pressing down on his shoulders. The massive dome above him showed the swirling colors of Nexus Prime's twin suns, casting strange shadows across the curved walls, where representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated areas. The air recycling system hummed quietly, mixing oxygen for the humans with methane for the Kethmora and liquid nitrogen vapor for the crystalline resonance. Everyone had what they needed to survive, but Kim wondered if anyone truly felt welcome here. He looked down at the datapad in his hands. The same request that had been denied 17 times before lay displayed on its surface. Simple words that asked for something humans had been seeking since they first joined this galactic community 2 centuries ago. Equal representation in council decisions. Equal access to trade routes. Equal treatment under galactic law. The word equal appeared so many times in their proposals that Kim sometimes wondered if the other species had forgotten what it meant. Park Dae-yoon shifted in, her seat behind him. As the human military attaché, she had seen firsthand how the Council's latest security measures affected human colonies, mandatory genetic screenings that no other species had to endure, forced relocations from worlds that humans had terraformed with their own blood and sweat, restrictions on ship movements that turned every human freighter into a suspected criminal. The list grew longer each year, always justified by the same phrase that made Kim's jaw clench with suppressed anger. For galactic security and the greater good. The council speaker's voice boomed across the chamber. Vextar of the Hegemony was an impressive sight even by galactic standards. His body resembled a massive octopus made of living metal, with tentacles that could manipulate a dozen different control interfaces at once. His species had been exploring space when humans were still discovering fire, and he never let anyone forget it. Today, his metallic skin showed the deep blue patterns that indicated formal authority, and his voice carried the mechanical undertones that all hegemony leaders used during official proceedings. The human petition for expanded colonial rights has been reviewed by the appropriate committees, Vextar announced. After careful consideration of all security implications and existing treaty obligations, the Council finds that current restrictions serve the best interests of galactic stability. The petition is denied. Kim had expected this response. They all had. But hearing the words spoken aloud in that dismissive tone made something cold and hard settle in his chest. He glanced around. The chamber at the other species representatives. The ethereals floated in their containment fields, their energy bodies pulsing with what humans had learned to recognize as satisfaction. The collective's hive-minded drones sat motionless, their shared consciousness already moving on to other matters. The crystalline resonance chimed softly to each other in harmonics that probably translated to something like, "Finally, those troublesome humans are put in their place." Lee Hyun-soo watched from his position in the intelligence section. His cybernetic implants allowed him to monitor communication channels across multiple species, and what he was hearing made his enhanced nervous system send warning signals throughout his body. The other species weren't just satisfied with denying the human request. They were relieved. They spoke in their private channels about how humans had been getting too ambitious lately, too demanding, too quick to question decisions that had worked perfectly well for thousands of years before Earth was even discovered. The Kethmora representative, a tall figure with 4 arms and skin that changed color with her emotions, was discussing trade quotas with her aide. Her skin showed the pale green of calculated satisfaction as she talked about how human shipping would be further restricted. The new regulations would force human merchants to pay higher fees and accept longer delays, making their goods less competitive in galactic markets. It was not technically a punishment, just a necessary adjustment to ensure fair competition for all species. Kim stood up slowly. The chamber's attention focused on him like a spotlight, and he could feel the weight of those alien gazes pressing against him. Some curious, some annoyed, some openly hostile. He had been Earth's representative to the Galactic Council for 12 years. And in that time, he had learned to read the subtle signs that each species used to communicate their true feelings. Right now, those signs all pointed to the same message. Humans were barely tolerated guests in this galactic community, and guests who complained too much might find themselves asked to leave. Council speaker, Kim said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. I would like to make a statement on behalf of the human coalition. Vextar's tentacles moved in what humans had learned was the hegemony equivalent of an annoyed sigh. The matter has been decided, Ambassador Kim. Further debate serves no useful purpose. This is not a debate, Kim replied. This is a statement. The silence that followed felt heavy and dangerous. Park Da-yoon's hand moved instinctively toward the ceremonial weapon at her side, though she knew it would be useless against the chamber's security systems. Her military training had taught her to recognize the moment when negotiations were about to become something else entirely, and every instinct she possessed was screaming warnings. Kim reached into his diplomatic pouch and withdrew a document that had been prepared months ago, though he had hoped never to use it. The Treaty of Galactic Cooperation, signed by humanity with such hope and optimism 200 years earlier. The document that had brought Earth into the galactic community, as what humans had believed would be equal partners in a bright future among the stars. For 3 standard cycles, Kim said, his voice growing stronger with each word, the human coalition has attempted to work within this system. We have followed every regulation, respected every tradition, and honored every obligation placed upon us. We have contributed our technology, our resources, and our expertise to the common good of all galactic civilization. He held up the treaty document so that every being in the chamber could see it. In return, we have been treated not as equals, but as children who must be managed and controlled. Our colonies have been restricted to systems that other species found undesirable. Our trade has been regulated to ensure we never compete too successfully with established economic powers. Our voice in council decisions has been limited to matters that affect only humanity, while decisions that affect us are made without our meaningful input. Vextar's tentacles began moving faster, a sign of growing agitation. Ambassador Kim, you are out of order. Please return to your designated area so that council business may continue. Kim ignored him. We have been told repeatedly that these restrictions are temporary, that they are necessary for galactic security, that they serve the greater good. But every year brings new restrictions, new limitations, new ways to ensure that humanity remains in its assigned place at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy. Park Da-yoon found herself holding her breath. She had seen Kim angry before, but never like this. There was something cold and final in his voice that made her think of doors being locked and bridges being burned. She looked around the chamber and saw that other representatives were beginning to pay serious attention. The ethereal's energy fields were fluctuating with what she recognized as concern, and even the collective's drones had turned their attention away from their internal communications. Today, Kim continued, you have once again denied a reasonable request for fair treatment. You have made it clear that humanity's place in this community will always be that of a junior partner, subject to restrictions and limitations that apply to no other species. You have shown us that no amount of contribution, cooperation, or patience will ever earn us the respect and equality that should be the birthright of any spacefaring civilization. He placed the treaty document on the table in front of him with careful precision. Therefore, the human coalition formally withdraws from all council proceedings, effective immediately. We will no longer participate in a system that treats us as subjects to be managed rather than equals to be respected. The chamber erupted in a chaos of voices, harmonics, energy pulses, and mechanical sounds as every species tried to respond at once. But Kim's voice cut through the noise like a blade. We thank the Council for the lessons it has taught us about our place in the galaxy. We will remember those lessons well. He turned and walked toward the chamber's exit, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence that followed his words. Park Da-yoon fell into step behind him, followed by the rest of the human delegation. They moved with military precision, their faces showing no emotion, their body language revealing nothing of their thoughts or intentions. Lee Hyun-soo remained in his intelligence position, but his enhanced senses were already picking up emergency communications flooding through the Council's networks. This was not how anyone had expected the session to end. The humans were supposed to accept the decision with their usual quiet frustration and continue working within the system, hoping that someday they might earn better treatment through continued good behavior. As the last human representative left the chamber, 3 weeks had passed since the humans walked out of the council chambers, and Vexatar was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. The hegemony leader's metallic tentacles moved restlessly across his control surfaces as he reviewed the reports flooding in from across the galaxy. Each document painted a picture that grew more disturbing with every passing day, and none of them showed the outcome that the Council had expected when they decided to put humanity in its place. The first sign of trouble had come from the trade networks. Choi Min-ho, a Kethmora merchant who had built his fortune on human goods, stood before the emergency council session with his skin showing the deep red patterns of financial distress. His forearms gestured helplessly as he tried to explain what was happening to galactic commerce. "Honored Council," he said, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated serious concern. "The human trade routes have not just been suspended. They have vanished completely. Every human freighter in Council space departed within 72 hours of their delegation's exit from these chambers. Every human trading post has been closed and evacuated. Every human commercial contract has been terminated with full compensation paid according to galactic law." Vextar's tentacles paused in their movement. "Surely this is a temporary measure intended to pressure the Council into reconsidering our decision. No species can survive economically by cutting itself off from galactic trade." Choi Min-ho's skin shifted to an even deeper shade of red. "That is what we believed initially. But the situation is far more complex than a simple trade embargo. Human goods have not just become unavailable. They have become impossible to obtain through any means. Every human manufacturer, every human research facility, every human industrial complex has simply stopped all contact with non-human entities." The ethereal representative Luminara flickered with patterns of confusion as her energy field expanded and contracted. "Perhaps other species can produce adequate substitutes for human technology. How difficult can it be to replace their contributions to galactic infrastructure?" The question hung in the air like a challenge that no one wanted to answer. Dr. Yoon Soo-jin, the human xenobiologist who had remained on Nexus Prime as a private citizen, watched from the public gallery as the Council began to grasp the magnitude of their miscalculation. She had tried to warn them about this possibility during previous sessions, but her concerns had been dismissed as human bias and emotional thinking. Lee Hyun-soo accessed his cybernetic databases and began pulling up industrial reports that painted a picture the Council had never bothered to examine closely. "According to galactic trade statistics," he announced, "human fusion reactors power 63% of all major space stations in Council territory. Human medical technology is used in 71% of all hospital facilities across 42 different species. Human artificial intelligence systems manage the logistics networks for 18 of the 23 major trade routes." The silence that followed his words was broken only by the soft chiming of crystalline resonance, communicating among themselves in frequencies that expressed something very close to panic. The implications of Lee Hyun-soo's data were becoming clear to everyone in the chamber, and none of those implications were pleasant. Vextar tried to maintain his authoritative posture, but his tentacles betrayed his growing anxiety as they moved in rapid, agitated patterns. "Surely the humans cannot maintain this isolation indefinitely. Their economy depends on galactic markets just as much as ours depends on their products. They will be forced to return to negotiations within a few months at most." Lumnara's energy field pulsed with what experienced diplomats recognized as deep concern. "Our monitoring stations have detected unusual activity in human space. Large-scale energy signatures consistent with major construction projects, but on a scale that defies our understanding of human capabilities. Whatever they are building, it appears to be far beyond anything we have observed from their civilization previously." Dr. Yoon Soo-jin felt a cold smile cross her face as she listened to the Council's growing confusion. She knew exactly what those energy signatures represented, because she had helped design some of the technologies that made them possible. The other species had made the mistake of assuming that humanity's contributions to galactic civilization represented the full extent of human capabilities. They had never considered the possibility that humans might have been holding back, developing technologies and strategies that they kept carefully hidden from alien observation. The collective's primary drone, a biomechanical entity that served as the interface between the hive mind and individual consciousness, spoke in the flat, emotionless tones that characterized their species. Analysis of human behavior patterns suggests a level of preparation that indicates long-term planning. Their withdrawal from Council space appears to have been anticipated and prepared for over an extended period. This was not an emotional response to recent events, but the execution of a predetermined strategy. Kang Ji-hoon sat in a small cafe, on Nexus Prime's commercial level, sipping synthetic coffee while monitoring Council communications through devices that appeared to be nothing more than standard personal electronics. His cover as a human graduate student studying alien cultures had served him well for 3 years, and now it was allowing him to observe the Council's reaction to humanity's departure from the inside. What he saw confirmed everything that human intelligence services had predicted about alien psychology and decision-making processes. The Council was reacting exactly as human analysts had expected. First came denial. The assumption that humanity's withdrawal was a temporary tantrum that would end as soon as economic pressure made continued isolation impossible. Then came confusion, as they realized that humans had planned for this exact scenario and were implementing countermeasures that the Council had never imagined. Soon would come anger, followed by increasingly desperate attempts to force humanity back into their assigned position within the galactic hierarchy. But what the Council did not yet understand was that humanity had spent 2 centuries studying every aspect of galactic civilization, not as interested participants, but as strategic analysts preparing for the day when cooperation would no longer be possible. Every human diplomat, every human trader, every human student who had lived among alien species had been gathering information about their capabilities, their weaknesses, their strategic resources, and their decision-making processes. The emergency session continued as representatives from various species began to realize that their civilizations were far more dependent on human technology than they had ever admitted to themselves. The Kethmora reported that their deep space mining operations were grinding to a halt without human drilling equipment. The Resonance discovered that their communication networks relied heavily on human signal processing algorithms. Even the mighty hegemony found that their most advanced warships used human-designed life support systems and human-manufactured components for their weapons arrays. Park Da-eun stood in the human embassy's communications center, monitoring the increasingly frantic messages being sent from Council headquarters to Earth and human colonies throughout the galaxy. The aliens were offering trade incentives, diplomatic concessions, and even limited increases in human representation within Council structures. Each offer was more generous than the last, and each one received the same response from human authorities. Polite acknowledgement followed by complete silence. What the Council could not comprehend was that humanity had already moved beyond the need for their approval or cooperation. The massive construction projects that Lumnara's monitoring stations had detected were not just buildings or shipyards. They were entire industrial complexes designed to be completely independent of galactic supply chains, manufacturing systems that could produce everything humans needed without relying on alien technology or resources. Lee Hyun-soo's enhanced senses detected increasing levels of stress hormones in the air recycling systems as Council representatives began to panic. Emergency communications were flooding through diplomatic channels as each species contacted their home governments to report the developing crisis. The words economic collapse and strategic vulnerability appeared with increasing frequency in intercepted messages. Dr. Yoon Soo-jin rose from her seat in the public gallery and walked quietly toward the exit. She had seen enough to confirm that the Council's reaction matched human predictions perfectly. Now it was time for her to complete her own mission and return to human space before the situation deteriorated further. Her colleagues were waiting for her report, and the information she had gathered about alien psychology and decision-making processes would be invaluable for the next phase of humanity's strategy. As she passed through the embassy's security checkpoint, for the last time, she reflected on the irony of the situation. The Council had spent decades treating humans as junior partners who needed to be managed and controlled. They had assumed that human cooperation was guaranteed, that human contributions to galactic civilization would continue regardless of how humans were treated, because humans had nowhere else to go. 6 months had passed since humanity's diplomatic withdrawal from the Galactic Council, and Commander Park Jae-sung stood on the bridge of the massive colony ship New Horizon as it prepared to leave Council space forever. Through the main view screen, He could see the last human settlement on Kepler Station, growing smaller as they pulled away, its lights flickering against the darkness of space like stars being extinguished one by one. The evacuation had taken longer than originally planned, but not because of any delays or complications. Every human citizen who wanted to leave Council territory had been given that opportunity, along with full compensation for any property or investments they were forced to abandon. What surprised the aliens was how few humans had chosen to stay behind. Out of nearly 40 million human civilians living in Council space, fewer than 3,000 had decided to remain, and most of those were intelligence operatives whose true identities were known only to human authorities. Engineer O. Su-young approached the commander's station with a data pad containing the final evacuation reports. Her expression showed the satisfaction of a job completed exactly according to plan, though Park could see the exhaustion in her eyes from months of coordinating the most complex logistics operation in human history. The last transport convoy cleared the outer marker 15 minutes ago, she reported. All human civilians have been safely relocated to designated colonies beyond the galactic rim. Industrial facilities have been completely dismantled and relocated according to Protocol 7. No strategic resources or technologies have been left behind for Council analysis. Park nodded as he reviewed the numbers on her datapad. The scale of the operation still amazed him, even though he had helped plan it. Entire cities had been disassembled and moved. Massive industrial complexes had been broken down into component parts and transported across thousands of light years to new locations that the Council could not even detect, let alone reach. Most impressive of all, the humans had accomplished this feat without leaving behind any trace of how they had done it. The key to the operation had been technologies that humanity had developed in secret over the past century, systems that the Council had never suspected existed. Mobile shipyards that could fold space around themselves and relocate in days rather than years. Modular industrial platforms that could be assembled and disassembled like massive mechanical puzzles. Transportation networks that used principles of physics that human scientists had discovered but never shared with their alien colleagues. Agent Kang Ji-hoon sat in a small observation lounge near the ship's docking bay, watching through a porthole, as the last human freighter matched course with the New Horizon. His mission on Nexus Prime had been completed successfully, and now he was returning to human space with intelligence data that would prove invaluable in the years to come. For 3 years, he had posed as a graduate student, attending alien universities and social gatherings, building relationships with members of various species, and learning everything he could about their cultures, technologies, and military capabilities. What the Council had never realized was that hundreds of humans like Kang had been conducting similar operations throughout galactic civilization. Every human tourist, every human exchange student, every human researcher who had lived among alien species had been gathering information according to carefully designed intelligence protocols. The aliens had welcomed them as signs of human integration into galactic society, never suspecting that they were actually conducting the most comprehensive espionage operation in galactic history. The information gathered by these operatives had allowed humanity to understand exactly how dependent the Council species were on human technology and resources. More importantly, it had revealed the weaknesses and vulnerabilities that could be exploited if peaceful coexistence ever became impossible. Every major space station, every critical trade route, every military installation in Council space had been studied and analyzed by human intelligence services. Dr. Lim Sung-min worked in the New Horizons research section, reviewing the final reports from human observation posts throughout the galaxy. As the head of human xenological research, he had spent decades studying alien psychology and behavior patterns, and the data he was seeing confirmed every prediction his team had made about Council reactions to humanity's withdrawal. The aliens were responding exactly as human analysts had expected. First had come disbelief, then confusion, then increasingly desperate attempts to restore the previous relationship without addressing any of the fundamental issues that had caused the crisis. The Council was offering trade incentives and diplomatic concessions, but they were still refusing to consider true equality for humanity within galactic civilization. What made the situation even more predictable was that each alien species was responding according to its own cultural priorities rather than working together on a unified strategy. The hegemony was focused on maintaining their position as the dominant military power. The ethereals were concerned about the disruption to their energy-based technologies. The collective was trying to calculate the economic impact on their hive-minded society. None of them were addressing the real issue, which was their fundamental assumption that humans should be grateful for whatever scraps of respect and autonomy the Council chose to grant them. Oh Su-young returned to the bridge with another report, this one containing information that made Park smile despite the seriousness of their situation. Intelligence sources confirmed that Council military forces have begun reconnaissance missions into the Outer Rim territories. Admiral Kexthu of the Hegemony personally led a fleet to the Sol system 3 days ago. Park could imagine the alien Admiral's shock when he arrived at Earth's former location. The Terran home system had been completely evacuated 6 months earlier, not just of people and mobile resources, but of everything that might provide useful intelligence to hostile forces. Even the space stations had been dismantled and relocated, leaving behind only empty orbital paths around a star that seemed somehow dimmer without the bustling civilization that had once surrounded it. The humans had not simply abandoned their home system. They had methodically erased every trace of their presence, removing not just their people and technology, but even the debris and waste products that might have revealed information about human capabilities or intentions. When Admiral Kexthu's fleet arrived expecting to find a vulnerable target for diplomatic pressure, they instead found a mystery that human intelligence services hoped would keep alien strategists busy for years. Kang Ji-hoon opened his personal communication device and sent a carefully coded message to his handlers in human intelligence. His signal would be intercepted and analyzed by Council security forces, but the encryption methods he was using had been specifically designed to resist alien decryption techniques. The message contained his final intelligence report on Council military capabilities and strategic planning processes, information that would help humanity prepare for whatever response the aliens might attempt. The most valuable intelligence he had gathered was not about alien technology or military strength, but about their decision-making processes and psychological weaknesses. The Council species had grown complacent during their millennia of galactic dominance, assuming that their position at the top of the civilization hierarchy was natural and permanent. They had never seriously considered the possibility that a younger species might develop capabilities that exceeded their own. This complacency had made them predictable in ways that human strategists could exploit. Their responses to unexpected situations followed patterns that had been established over thousands of years of tradition and protocol. They were psychologically incapable of adapting quickly to new threats or opportunities, because their entire civilization was built around the assumption that change happened slowly and could be managed through established procedures. Park studied the star charts on his command display, looking at the route that would take them to humanity's new home beyond the galactic rim. The journey would take several weeks, even with their most advanced faster-than-light systems, but he was not concerned about pursuit. The Council's ships were fast enough to catch human vessels if they knew where to look, but finding humanity's new colonies would require them to search an area of space larger than the entire known galaxy. What the aliens did not understand was that humanity had been preparing these refugee colonies for over 50 years, establishing hidden settlements in star systems that were so remote and difficult to reach that no alien species had ever bothered to explore them. These colonies were not just hideouts or temporary bases. They were fully functional civilizations with their own industrial capabilities, research facilities, and defense systems. The New Horizons destination was one of the largest of these, Hidden Worlds, a planet that human terraforming teams had been secretly preparing for decades. By the time they arrived, it would be ready to support millions of human colonists with a standard of living that exceeded anything they had enjoyed in Council space. More importantly, it would be completely independent of alien technology or resources. 1 year after humanity's exodus from Council space, the galaxy faced a crisis that made their absence devastatingly clear. The Devourers had returned, and this time the ancient defenses that had protected galactic civilization for millennia were crumbling like sand castles before a tsunami. Captain Nam Tae-hyun stood in the command center of the human fleet ship Indomitable, watching through long-range sensors as another Council world went dark under the relentless advance of the extragalactic swarm. The Devourers were not a species in any sense that galactic civilization understood. They were something far worse, a force of pure consumption that had appeared from the void between galaxies every few thousand years throughout recorded history. Each time they came, they consumed everything in their path, stripping entire star systems of matter and energy before retreating back into the cosmic darkness to digest their harvest and prepare for the next feeding cycle. For over 10,000 years, the combined military forces of the Galactic Council had been able to contain and eventually repel these invasions. Their success had been built on three critical factors that every military strategist in Council space understood: superior technology that could match the Devourer's adaptive capabilities, tactical flexibility that could respond to their constantly evolving attack patterns, and the psychological resilience needed to fight an enemy that showed no mercy and took no prisoners. Admiral Song Hae-jin reviewed the tactical reports flowing in from Council space with a mixture of professional interest and grim satisfaction. Without human contributions to their military doctrine, Council forces were failing on all three critical factors. Their technology was stagnating without human innovation to drive continuous improvement. Their tactics were rigid and predictable, without human strategic thinking to provide creative solutions. Most importantly, their morale was collapsing without the human ability to inspire desperate last stands against impossible odds. The irony was not lost on her that the Council had spent decades restricting human military development, claiming that it was necessary to prevent humans from becoming a threat to galactic security. Now that the real threat had arrived, they were discovering that their own security had depended far more on human capabilities than they had ever admitted to themselves. Dr. Lim Sung-min worked in the Indomitables research section, analyzing intelligence data that painted a picture of military disaster spreading across Council territory. As the head of human xenological research, he had predicted exactly this scenario in classified reports that had been dismissed by human leadership as unnecessarily pessimistic. Now those predictions were being proven correct with a precision that he wished had been wrong. The Devourers were not just overwhelming Council defenses through superior numbers or firepower. They were adapting to every strategy and weapon that the aliens deployed against them, learning from each encounter, and developing countermeasures faster than Council forces could respond. This had always been their greatest strength. But in previous invasions, human tactical analysts had been able to stay one step ahead of their adaptation process through creative thinking and psychological insights that alien minds could not match. Without human involvement, Council military commanders were falling back on traditional strategies that had worked in previous conflicts, not understanding that the Devourers learned from those conflicts too. Every classic tactic in the Council's military doctrine had been observed and analyzed by the enemy during past invasions, and now they were being turned against their former users with devastating effectiveness. The communication console in the command center activated with an incoming message from Council space. Nam Tae-hyun authorized the transmission, and the familiar image of Council speaker Vextar appeared on the main display. The hegemony leader's usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something that looked remarkably like desperation, and his metallic tentacles moved in patterns that human intelligence services had learned to associate with extreme stress. "Captain Nam," Vextar began, his mechanical voice carrying undertones of barely controlled panic, "I am authorized by the full Galactic Council to request immediate military assistance from the human coalition. The Devourer invasion has exceeded all our containment protocols, and our projected casualties are approaching civilizational extinction levels for multiple member species." Nam exchanged glances with Admiral Song, who was monitoring the conversation from her position at the tactical station. They had been expecting this communication for weeks, ever since their long-range surveillance systems detected the first signs of Council military collapse. The question was not whether the Council would eventually ask for human help, but whether humanity would choose to provide it. "Council Speaker," Nam replied, his voice carefully neutral. "The human coalition withdrew from all Council proceedings over 1 year ago. We are no longer bound by mutual defense treaties or alliance obligations. Why should we involve ourselves in a conflict that is not our responsibility?" Vextar's tentacles froze for a moment, as if he could not believe what he was hearing. "Captain, the Devourers threaten all life in the galaxy. This is not a political dispute between species. This is a struggle for the survival of civilization itself." Admiral Song activated her own communication channel. her image appearing beside Nam's on Vextar's display. Council Speaker, when humanity requested equal representation in galactic defense planning, we were told that our ideas were too aggressive and destabilizing. When we asked for access to restricted military technologies, we were informed that humans could not be trusted with such dangerous capabilities. When we proposed new tactical doctrines for dealing with existential threats, we were dismissed as inexperienced and naive. She paused to let her words sink in before continuing. Now you come to us asking for the very military capabilities that you spent decades preventing us from developing within the Council framework. Perhaps you can explain why those capabilities are suddenly acceptable when you need them, but were too dangerous when we wanted to contribute them voluntarily. The silence that followed stretched for several seconds before Vexatar responded. Admiral, I understand your resentment, but surely you must see that past political disagreements are irrelevant when faced with total annihilation. The Council is prepared to offer significant concessions in exchange for human military intervention. Nam leaned back in his command chair, studying the alien leader's desperate expression. What kind of concessions? Full voting rights in all. Council proceedings. Unrestricted access to all galactic trade routes. Complete autonomy for human colonies and territorial expansion. We are even prepared to discuss leadership positions for humans in key council committees. Dr. Lim Sung-min listened to the negotiations from his research station, recognizing the psychological patterns that his team had predicted would emerge during exactly this type of crisis. The council was finally offering everything that humanity had requested over the past 2 centuries, but only because they had been forced to the edge of extinction by an enemy they could not defeat alone. It was a classic example of alien psychology under extreme stress, when their usual superiority complex temporarily collapsed and was replaced by desperate pragmatism. What made the situation even more revealing was that Vextar still did not understand the fundamental nature of humanity's capabilities. He was offering political concessions and economic benefits, assuming that humans would be motivated by the same desire for status and resources that drove alien decision-making. He had no comprehension of the technological and strategic advantages that humanity had developed during their forced isolation. Admiral Song's response demonstrated the gap between alien assumptions and human reality. Council Speaker, you seem to believe that humanity's reluctance to assist you is based on wounded pride or desire for better treaty terms. You are mistaken. We are hesitating because we are not certain that your civilization is worth saving. Vextar's tentacles recoiled as if he had been physically struck. Admiral, surely you cannot mean that. Despite our past disagreements, the Council represents the accumulated wisdom and culture of 47 different species developed over thousands of years of galactic civilization. A civilization, Song replied coldly, that has spent the last year desperately trying to maintain restrictions on human expansion, even while facing extinction by an external enemy. A civilization that has offered to treat us as equals only after it became clear that you cannot survive without our help. A civilization that still believes it has the right to determine whether humanity deserves respect based on your evaluation of our worthiness. She activated a secondary display that showed tactical analysis of the Devourer invasion. We have been monitoring your military response to this crisis, Council Speaker. Your forces are not just losing because they lack human support. They are losing because your entire strategic doctrine is based on the assumption that you are inherently superior to any possible enemy. You have not adapted your tactics in over 1,000 years because you believed that adaptation was unnecessary for a superior force. The analysis continued with devastating precision. The Council's civilizations fled deeper into the galactic core as the Devourers consumed system after system, their ancient feeding patterns now unstoppable by any force that galactic military doctrine could deploy against them. On Nexus Prime, emergency evacuation ships loaded refugees from a dozen different species, while planetary defense systems prepared for what everyone believed would be a final, hopeless stand against an enemy that had never been defeated by conventional warfare. Then Fleet Admiral Bae Young-sik appeared at the edge of the Nexus system, with a human armada that defied every assumption about military technology and strategic capability that the Council had developed over thousands of years of galactic dominance. The fleet that emerged from faster-than-light travel was not just large, though its size was impressive enough to make alien military analysts revise their estimates of human industrial capacity. What made it truly shocking was that every ship in the formation represented technology that should not have existed according to everything the aliens thought they knew about human capabilities. Captain Han Subin led the first wave of fighter squadrons as they launched from the human carriers, her spacecraft equipped with weapons and defensive systems that combined the best technologies from every major species in the galaxy, improved beyond recognition by human engineering and innovation. Her fighters used ethereal energy manipulation systems that could channel raw stellar plasma into devastating offensive beams. They carried crystalline computational matrices that processed battlefield data faster than any alien computer network. They were coordinated through collective hive communication protocols that allowed thousands of individual pilots to fight as a single, perfectly synchronized organism. But what made these hybrid technologies truly dangerous was not their alien origins, but the human improvements that had been added to each system. The ethereal energy manipulation had been enhanced with human understanding of quantum mechanics to create weapons that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. The crystalline computing systems had been integrated with human artificial intelligence to produce tactical analysis capabilities that bordered on precognition. The hive communication networks had been modified with human psychological insights to maintain individual creativity and initiative within group coordination. The result was a fighting force that combined the best capabilities of every galactic species while adding uniquely human elements that made the whole greater than the sum of its parts. The aliens had never seen anything like it because they had never imagined that such combination and improvement was possible. Each species had developed their technologies in isolation, assuming that their own methods were optimal and that other approaches were either inferior or incompatible with their own systems. President Cho Yun-ji stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship, the massive dreadnought Eternal Dawn, watching through tactical displays as human forces engaged the devourer swarm that had been consuming the outer regions of the Nexus system. Her message to the cowering council was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every surviving government in galactic civilization would hear her words clearly. "People of the Galactic Council," she began, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who held overwhelming advantages and knew exactly how to use them. "1 year ago, you made it clear that humanity's place in galactic civilization would always be that of junior partners, subject to restrictions and limitations that you determined were necessary for our own good and the security of the galaxy." She paused as human weapons systems engaged devourer attack formations, the alien swarm's adaptive defenses proving useless against human tactical doctrine that had been specifically designed to counter their evolutionary advantages. "We accepted your decision and withdrew from participation in a system that offered us responsibility without authority, obligation without respect, and service without recognition." The battle continued around them as she spoke. Human forces systematically dismantling devourer formations with a precision and effectiveness that made alien military observers question everything they thought they understood about warfare. The enemy that had seemed unstoppable when facing Council forces was being methodically destroyed by human squadrons that fought with a combination of technological superiority and tactical innovation that the aliens had never imagined possible. General Park Woo-sung coordinated ground forces operations from his command ship as human marines landed on worlds that had been partially consumed by the devourer swarm. His soldiers wore armor that incorporated defensive technologies from every major galactic species, enhanced with human improvements that made them virtually invulnerable to enemy attacks. They carried weapons that could adapt to any threat in real time, using human artificial intelligence to analyze enemy capabilities and develop countermeasures faster than any biological mind could process. But what made the human ground forces truly devastating was not their equipment, but their training and doctrine. Every human soldier had been prepared to fight against enemies that could adapt to any strategy, using tactics that had been developed through careful study of alien military psychology and devourer feeding patterns. They did not just fight to win individual battles. They fought to break the enemy's ability to learn from their defeats, using psychological warfare and strategic deception to disrupt the adaptive processes that made the devourers so dangerous. The ground campaign proceeded, with mechanical efficiency as human forces liberated world after world from devourer occupation. But they did so under the human flag, not the Council banner, making it clear to alien refugees that their salvation came from the species they had spent decades treating as subordinates and inferiors. Dr. Lim Sung-min worked in the Eternal Dawns research section, coordinating real-time analysis of devourer capabilities and weaknesses with human forces throughout the combat zone. His team had spent years preparing for exactly this scenario, developing weapons and tactics specifically designed to exploit the psychological and biological vulnerabilities that made the devourers both powerful and predictable. What the aliens had never understood was that the devourers' greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Their ability to adapt to any strategy made them incredibly dangerous against enemies who used traditional military doctrine, but it also made them vulnerable to enemies who understood how their adaptation process worked and could manipulate it for strategic advantage. Human tactics were designed not just to defeat devourer forces, but to feed them false information that would cause their adaptation systems to develop in directions that made them more vulnerable to follow-up attacks. Every human victory was designed to teach the enemy lessons that would make them weaker rather than stronger, using their own learning capabilities against them in ways that no other species had ever attempted. The psychological impact on Council forces was almost as important as the military results. Alien soldiers and commanders who had been retreating in panic for months suddenly found themselves fighting alongside human units that made victories seem not just possible, but inevitable. Human officers took command of mixed formations with an authority that came not from political appointment, but from demonstrated competence under fire. Captain Han Subin led her fighter squadron through the debris field of what had once been the Devourer Swarm's primary assault formation, her pilots reporting successful completion of objectives that alien military planners had classified as impossible. The enemy formations that had seemed unstoppable when facing Council forces had been systematically destroyed by human squadrons using tactics that the aliens were still trying to understand. The key to human success was not just superior technology, though their equipment advantages were significant. It was their fundamental approach to warfare, which treated every engagement as an opportunity to learn and adapt rather than a test of predetermined capabilities. Human forces did not just fight to win battles. They fought to understand their enemies better, using each victory to gather intelligence that would make future victories easier and more complete. President Cho Eun-ji continued her broadcast as the last Devourer strongholds in the Nexus system were overrun by human forces. We return to this galaxy not because we seek your approval or permission, but because we choose to defend innocent life against those who would destroy it. We fight not as your subordinates following orders, but as your equals offering partnership in the face of extinction. She gestured toward the tactical displays that showed Devourer forces in full retreat, their supposedly unstoppable advance broken by human military capabilities that had been developed in secret during their year of isolation. The treaty we offer today does not ask for your recognition of our equality. It assumes that equality as a starting point and invites you to join us in building a galactic civilization that serves all its members rather than privileging some at the expense of others. The silence that followed her words was broken only by the communications chatter of human forces as they completed their systematic destruction of the Devourer invasion. Council representatives throughout the galaxy listened to reports that described military achievements that should have been impossible,